with all the attention and energy surrounding the 16-year-old climate activist Greta Thunberg, who addressed the United Nations on Monday, I was fascinated by her message, but I was really fascinated by the reactions to her, which, as you know, were all over the map. It turns out this 16-year-old girl is a pretty polarizing figure. Depending on your perspective, she's either a heroic, courageous prophet, or she's a shrill little girl who's been put up to this by her parents or something else, who should be in school and doing normal 16-year-old things. Incredibly polarizing. What was disheartening about all of the coverage about her was that it was about how polarizing she was and not about the very important issues that she is talking about climate change. You read and hear the same news that I do. You know that the problem is real. Temperatures are rising. Here in North America, there's something like 1 million fewer birds than there were 30 years ago. Someone after 8 o'clock said that apparently doesn't apply to geese, but never mind. That sea levels are rising. We know that life is going to be different. Life is going to be harder in the years and decades to come unless we do something about it, and we don't seem to be very good at organizing ourselves, at motivating ourselves to do anything about it. I've been reading Jonathan Safran Foer's new book, We Are the Weather, Saving the Planet Begins at Breakfast. It's a series of essays on what he sees as the interlocking crises of climate change and our nutritional habits. He says that one of the biggest things, one of the major ways that we could have a positive impact on the climate is to eat about 90% less meat. The production of meat has an enormous impact on the climate, not only on the animal, not only because of the presence of the animals, but because of the monoculture, the growing of huge swaths of our land for corn and soybeans, which then get fed to these animals. It's not good for the land, it's not good for the environment. One of the major impacts he says we could have would be to drastically cut our meat consumption. And he says, even though he knows this, he has trouble convincing himself and others around him to do that, just in their own personal life, to make that incremental change, that incremental difference in this crisis. And he blames that on he attributes that to human nature. He writes that because of human nature, people like me, who should care and should be motivated and should make big changes, find it almost impossible to make small sacrifices for profound future benefit. And similar to our inability to do this in our own personal lives, collectively we seem to be unable to do it as well, maybe even less able. In short, we prefer to have that inexpensive cheeseburger than to do what needs to be done to ensure a decent climate for our future. We get distracted by what is easy, by what is interesting, by our momentary needs. We get distracted from what is truly important. I relay all of this not to depress us, although it is depressing, but because I think that what the rich man is paying attention to, or more specifically, what is distracting the rich man from paying attention to the things that he's supposed to be paying attention to, is what's underlying the story that Jesus tells in this gospel. You probably know this story, it's pretty familiar, you maybe learned it in Sunday school. Jesus says there was a rich man, and there was Lazarus. The rich man wears fine purple robes and linen. He feasts sumptuously every day with his friends. And Lazarus, who is poor, is lying outside the rich man's gates, pining away, longing for the scraps from the rich man's table so he can have something to eat. There's this detail about dogs coming to lick Lazarus' sores, and scholars are split right down the middle about whether that is supposed to be comforting for Lazarus or is a further affliction. I suspect your reaction to that detail may depend on whether or not you are a dog person. The rich man dies and is buried. Lazarus dies and is carried up to heaven and is seated with Abraham, that patriarch of the nation of Israel. The rich man is in Hades being tormented, and he gazes up and he sees Abraham and Lazarus there, and he cries out to Abraham to send Lazarus down to him to dip his finger in some water and to cool his tongue because he's in agony in the flames. And Abraham says, no, you in your life got good things, and Lazarus likewise in his life got evil things. I have to say, I don't much like this story. I have some problems with it. The only crime that the rich man seems to have is that he was rich. We're not told that he was that he gained his wealth through cheating or being a scoundrel, or that he stole it. We're not told that he was somehow an evil person. It's just that he was wealthy and he liked to have his friends over for big meals. And Abraham's is pretty high and mighty, really, when you think about Abraham's history. Abraham was an incredibly wealthy man. He had an army of servants, household servants. He had massive herds and great wealth. And at one point in his life, he sold his wife Sarah off into the harem of the local chieftain in order to save his own skin. And if you don't believe me, you can check out Genesis chapter 20 this afternoon. It's a riveting story. So to have Abraham being so firm, so judgmental, is a little, kind of sticks in my craw. Why is Abraham up there in heaven, even though he was wealthy and this other wealthy man isn't? And Lazarus' name means God is my help. And I just bet that Lazarus would have preferred to get some of that help during his life, not to have to wait till after he dies. What does that say about God? That God will let someone suffer in life so that they can be rewarded afterwards. It's not a very appealing vision of who God is. Jesus tells this story in the Gospel of Luke. And in Luke's Gospel, Jesus time and time again points out that the way we look at the world is not the way God looks at the world. The things that we pay attention to are not the things that God pays attention to. And additionally, in Luke's Gospel, Jesus talks time and time again about how the world is going to be shaken up. Things are going to be flipped on their head. In the very beginning of Luke's Gospel, Mary, Jesus' mother, sings a song we call the Magnificat, in which she talks about the lowly being lifted up, the mighty being thrown from their thrones, the poor being fed, and the rich being sent away empty. This story is an illustration of that whole idea of the world being flipped upside down. Jesus tells it to point out that God comes to shake up the order of things. Now, you and I know, we sense in our gut what the problem here is. We know why it is that the rich man ends up in Hades. It's because somehow in the midst of all of his feasting and all of his time with his friends and his attention to his fine clothes and taking care of his big house, he has failed to see what was really important in this life. He has failed to see Lazarus, who is in need, at his gates. He has failed to figure out how to use a little bit of the great wealth that he's been given to make life a little better for others. So this story is, in a sense, I think, simply an invitation to you and I to pay attention to the world around us, to look at what you and I can do to make things a little better. And whether that is something related to climate change, or income inequality, or hunger in our community, or the disparity in education systems, or you name it. There are all sorts of things that we know could be better in our world, right here in Liverpool, right here in Syracuse, and around the world. May this story remind us to pay attention to the needs of the world around us and to not be distracted. May the story remind us to see the Lazaruses at our gates and to welcome them as we're able to our table. Or as Paul's letter to Timothy puts it so beautifully, we are to do good. We are to be rich in good works, generous, ready to share, storing up ourselves a treasure of a good foundation for the future, so that we may take hold of the life that really is life. Amen.
Amen.